So it is wonderful to have you all with us this evening for another in our series of webinars from the Northern Ireland Botanical Skills Project, a project funded by DARA, whose logo is here above me, and make the entire project possible. And that project is supporting botanists in Northern Ireland, and indeed with talks like this further afield, across the skills spectrum with training, events, and online webinars like this. So yes, thank you to DARA, the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. This is one in a series of webinars. The previous webinars have all been recorded and are on the BSBI's YouTube page. You will get a link to that after this meeting. So if this is the first one you've attended and you're interested in what's gone before, you'll be able to watch all of those. This is the last one we're doing this year, but we have a few more after Christmas as well. And in the email that's sent out after this event, I will send a link to that page in case you're interested in Cotoneastus, grasses, sedges and rushes, rubus in Northern Ireland, which are some of the talks that are happening after Christmas as well. And as well as DARA, this talk wouldn't be possible without the BSBI. So if this is the first interaction you've had with the BSBI, the Botanical Society of Britain and Ireland, please do have a look at our website and consider supporting us in some way. There will be a Q&A at the end of this talk. You'll notice there's a Q&A box at the bottom, and I can see there's already a question in the Q&A. If somebody arrives a bit late, can they still join? Of course they can. Yes, they'll just sort of drop in the middle, and of course they'll be able to catch up with the recording later. So if anybody else has any questions as Robert is going through his talk, drop them in the Q&A, and at the end I will serve those questions up. So if something occurs to you, please drop it in there. And we'll go through as many of those at the end of the webinar as possible. Though, of course, if we start to get a little bit past 8 o'clock, I will draw things to a close. This will be recorded and it will be available on YouTube afterwards. So if you have to leave early or your internet drops out or whatever, you will be able to catch up with it later. I think that's all the housekeeping. So with that, I will introduce our speaker for this evening. So Robert, who's been sitting very patiently here whilst I've been yammering on, has been the Vice County Recorder of Fermanagh for over 40 years and is the joint author with Ralph Forbes of the Flora of Fermanagh. So I'm going to hand over to Robert, and whilst Robert starts talking, I'm going to get the presentation sorted because we're doing a little bit of a double act with Robert doing all of the information and me sharing slides.
Right, I'm beginning. I hope that people can see me. Part of the introduction, right, excellent. Right, the introduction didn't say that also that I'm a retired maths teacher, which is rather interesting because the speaker of the last time was a retired GP, as far as I know. So it shows that you don't have to be a sort of academic botanist to be interested in in plants. And I would encourage non-botanists to get involved, non-technical botanists to get involved in botany. So this is entitled An Introduction to the Horsetails of Fermanagh, Ireland and Great Britain. And as I'm not an academic botanist, it is more a sort of how to identify these in the field. And you don't need a microscope, you don't need a key, you just need to watch carefully what's on the slides. So off we go. First slide. Now, you can all read what's written there. Over half of the world's species of horsetails grow in Britain and Ireland. Now, this statement goes back to something that Desmond Meikle said to me 20-something years ago, which I thought was an astonishing statement. Half the world's species of horsetails grow in not just Britain and Ireland, but in Fermanagh. And I thought, wow, I thought that at the time of the dinosaurs, 200 or 300 million years ago, the world was dominated by horsetails and ferns, and surely there must be more than whatever number grown in Fermanagh, double that in the world today. So recently I sort of thought I began to count up the numbers and see what half the world's species of horsetails actually meant. So next slide. So here is a sheet telling us what it meant. In Britain and Ireland, there are 8 species of horsetails, which are listed there. And there are 11 species, hybrid species, most of which are very rare. There are, in fact, 2, at least if you include Ireland, 2 common species of horsetails, which occur in up to 100, one occurs in hundreds and hundreds of hectads, and Mackay's horsetail occurs in up to 100 hectads in Ireland. So there's 8 species and 2 hybrids grow in these islands. 8, and in the whole world, there are just 15 species in the whole world. There are as many species in Fermanagh as there are in Canada or the United States. It is astonishing. So, next slide. Now, here is a map showing the distribution of horsetails across these islands. And the darker the colour, the more species there are. And the maximum, the darkest squares of all, have 10, and then 9, going down to 1 and 0 at the other end of the scale. Now, you will see that in general, the further west you go, the darker the colours. And if you try to pick out the sort of hot spots, or wet spots might be more accurate, for where these things grow, you will see my county, Fermanagh, if your geography is good enough. Fermanagh is very dark. Antrim in the northwest of Ireland is very dark. Go up to Skye, just in from the Outer Hebrides, is very dark. The Cairngorms has a lot. And then you go down to sort of South Wales, there's a dark spot. Now, there are, if in the hectads, there are nearly 4,000 hectads across these islands, 1,000 of them being in Ireland. So of the 4,000 hectads, there's less than 100 have no horsetails at all. So 3,900 or something like that hectads have at least one horsetail. So wherever you are sitting at this moment, there's almost certain to be a horsetail in the hectad in which you live, unless you happen to be on a coastal island with very little habitat, or a hectad on the coast with almost no land. So there's a horsetail somewhere near you, because near all but 100 hectads have at least one horsetail. Going to the other end of the scale, there are 3 hectads which have all 10 species, 8 species and the 2 subspecies. The 3 maximum hectads, one is in Fermanagh, about 10 miles from where I'm sitting. One is in County Antrim, up on the northwest coast of Ireland, and the third one is in Skye. So there's 3 hectads that contain all 10. And that's the top end of the range. Now, if you go down to how many hectads contain 9 of the 10, there are just 17 that contain 9 of the 10 hectads. And here's an interesting fact for those of us on this island, that of the 17 that contain 9 hectads, 16 of them are in Ireland. So Ireland in these islands is the centre for horsetails. Next slide. Right, so now we will have a look at the 8 species and the 2 hybrids. And some of them are so obvious they don't need any sort of introduction. And if you've seen this one, you will have no difficulty recognizing it, and you'll remember it. This is Equisetum telmatia, previously known as Equisetum maximum, great horsetail. And the maximum really describes it. It can be 5 feet tall. It can be as tall as me or any of us when it's at its tallest, but it's usually about 3 feet tall, and it grows in dense stands, often along the sides of roads and in heavy soils. In the springtime, it produces very noticeable, huge sporing bodies, like this picture on the left. And if you give them a little kick with your foot, clouds of spores head off into the surrounding countryside. It's widespread throughout these islands, except north of the Great Glen and the central belt in Scotland. So once you get up into Scotland, this is one that declines. Next. The most easy to one of the most easy ones to identify, partly because of its habitat and because it is so distinctive, is water horsetail, Equisetum fluviatile. It's the water horsetail tells you, it gives it all away. It grows nearly always in standing water, though it can survive sort of on the fringes of lakes and water bodies. It's very tall, often unbranched, and has a very huge hollow in the middle. Its stem walls are very thin, and we'll come back to that later. So water horsetail is widespread everywhere, except for surprisingly a few hectads in southwest England, where it seems to sort of, down in Devon and Cornwall, it seems to peter out. There aren't enough sort of suitable bits of standing water there, I imagine. So that's water horsetail. Next, please. And this is a picture which this species doesn't really need any huge introduction, because you will all know this. Gardeners call it mare's tail, but it's field horsetail, and this is the one that is the menace in your garden. Certainly my garden, it's growing all over my lawn, and I mow it down every spring, all its fruiting bodies standing up, and I mow them down, which just, I suppose, spreads it even more. But it's an absolute menace in gardens, and it cannot be got rid of. Field horsetail. And this is I've written down that there are less than 30, only 34 hectads do not have it, or something like that. There are very few hectads in Britain that do not have this horsetail. It is everywhere. So it's certainly near you. Next. Now, field horsetail that we've just seen is very like the next horsetail that we're coming to, that is Equisetum palustre, marsh horsetail. So how do you, if you're in a sort of mixed habitat, sort of in a pathway in a bit of woodland near a lake or something, how can you tell field horsetail from the next one we're coming to? And one of the ways is to look at how the first internode on each branch, first internode, compares with the sheath on this adjacent stem. Is it longer or shorter? And if you maybe James will sort of run his cursor along one of the internodes on the first branch and show how it is longer than the much longer than the internode on the adjacent stem. So that's a very notable feature. And if you go out the branches at each of the internodes on the branches, the teeth are usually whitish and do not clasp the stem. So it's not very clear on that picture, but we will see the next species, those internodes on the branches are black and clasp the stem. On this species, they are white and do not clasp the stem. Next. Now, here is this next species we were talking about, marsh horsetail, and it's a much more delicate species than what you get growing in your garden, in your flower beds and on your lawn and things. It's much more delicate. The branches are much more upright and thinner, and it's usually associated with wet habitats, swampy areas beside lakes, and often beside sort of paths through conifer forests and things. It sometimes grows. So this marsh horsetail, and the next slide, this is more obvious than the last pictures that I was able to show. This shows the first internode on the branch is much, much shorter than the stem internode, the sheath on the stem. So if you see the sheath on the stem, it goes up to there, and the internode on the branch is much, much, much shorter. If we look out at one of the branches, maybe the bottom right-hand corner, you can see the teeth on the branch have black ends to them, and they sort of clasp the stem. And that's a very good thing to look for. But the real one is, how long is the first internode compared to the stem sheath. That's marsh horsetail. And it's widespread everywhere, except, and this is surprising to me, except in the southwest of Ireland. It seems to sort of fizzle out for some reason. I'm not sure why. So that's marsh horsetail. Next. Now this is, I think, the most beautiful horsetail we have, wood horsetail. And the picture on the left shows it in the springtime with a fruiting body on the top, and it looks like some sort of ballet dancer or something, with its beautiful, flimsy, delicate branches curving down. As it matures over the summer, it becomes a much more shaggy sort of item, as on the right, and it can grow in quite large clumps, again, sometimes along damp roadsides and in woodlands and things. It's again quite widespread, except in the south and east of England, and in the centre of Ireland it's not very common either. But it's one of the most beautiful horsetails there is, and it's not to be confused with the next horsetail, which is a shade horsetail. Now, this, at first impression, you can see it on the left and on the right. You would say, oh, this looks a bit like the last one, wood horsetail. But on closer examination, you will find that it is not branched. It's branched once. The last horsetail was branched twice. This one is shade horsetail. It's only branched once, and it's one of the rarer horsetails. There's only two or three sites for it in Fermanagh, and outside the north of Ireland, I do not think it occurs outside in Ireland. I don't think it occurs outside the north of Ireland, and one of the sites in my county is, I think, the most southerly site in Britain and Ireland for it. And I think it was Christopher Page said that it was one of the species that was likely to be affected by climate change, because at present it is more or less restricted to the cairngorms, the Pennines, and the northeast of Ireland. And as I say, Fermanagh is the most southerly site in these islands for it. So if you live in the areas I mentioned, the Pennines, the cairngorms, or northeast Ireland, there's your best chance of seeing it. So next slide. Now this shows the distinction between wood horsetail and shade horsetail when you take a sort of a cross section of them and spread out the branches. On the left, you will see wood horsetail. It's branched twice. And on the right, you will see shade horsetail, which just goes out, and the branches don't branch again. So that's one of the sort of diagnostic features, if you are lucky enough to find shade horsetail. Next. Now we come to two horsetails and one hybrid, which are three horsetails, which are winter green. They're all the year round. I saw one of them yesterday when I was out for a walk, in perfect condition. So this is Dutch rush, Equisetum hyemale, which is very robust, very stiff, is usually unbranched, though it does get branched, especially if it's broken. It grows sometimes in massive clumps on shifting banks of rivers and things. And it has these very distinct white internodes, which are cut off square at the top and don't have any, don't, after they mature a little bit, they don't have any sort of teeth or anything sticking out of them. Uh, they are called Dutch rush, apparently, because for a long period they were imported from Holland and used as pot scourers. And Grindling Gibbons, the woodworker, apparently used them for finishing off his pieces of woodwork. But I don't think they're used for that anymore. We have more up-to-date methods of scouring both pots and wood. But that's Dutch rush, which is occasional in the northern half of Ireland, northeast England, and eastern Scotland. It's not everywhere, and I consider myself slightly lucky if I come across it. So Dutch rush. Next, please. And this is a very, very thin version of Dutch rush, variegated horsetail, that is what, 3 millimeters, 3 millimeters thick. And again, like the last species, can grow in very dense clusters in damp habitats. I see it beside lakes and things around Lower Lough Erne, big patches of it. The way to discern it, to be sure that you found it, is to look at the internodes, which are demonstrated in the left hand of the picture. And one of the books describes what you see there as Gothic arches. The sort of white Gothic arch is very distinctive. And this is the one place in this identification of horsetails where a lens just makes it ever so clearer that it is a Gothic arch and not sort of some white piece cut off like in the last Dutch rush one. So Equisetum variegated horsetail. Usually it is found growing maybe a foot high, but there is a version of it that grows in dune slacks along the west of Ireland and other places where it is absolutely flat to the ground and maybe is only 3 or 4 centimeters long. And to find the dune slack version, you really need to get down and crawl around on your hands and knees. James was in Ireland a year or so ago, and we went to the county Sligo, and we spent quite some time crawling around on our hands and knees, and James is very good at that. And eventually we found quite a lot of it, but it did require a lot of searching. But it's worth searching for in a damp dune slack in the west of Britain. Variegated horsetail. Next, please. Now, the last two species hybridize, Dutch rush and variegated horsetail, hybridized to give this hybrid, which is called Mackay's horsetail, after J.T. Mackay, who came to Ireland in the early 1800s from Scotland as the curator of Trinity College Dublin's Botanic Gardens. And he was, of course, a botanist being in charge of the gardens, and he was the first person to describe this hybrid. And it is a hybrid between Dutch rush and variegated horsetail. And I'm looking at my notes here. It occurs in 20 hectares in the whole of Great Britain, the whole of your side of the Irish Sea. It occurs in 20 hectares, whereas in Fermanagh alone it occurs in 13 hectares. So it is very rare in Great Britain, but there's quite a lot of it in Ireland, and I suspect that it's under-recorded. Now, it is sort of halfway in thickness between the last two species, and again it grows in dense stands, and it's not very easy to see, but under the trees along the edge of the lake there's a huge stand, maybe 15 meters long, of it. And the way to be it is you can see it looks a bit like the Dutch rush, but its internodes aren't quite as white, and it certainly doesn't have Gothic arches. But here is where, again, another place where a lens might be handy. Next slide, please. If you look at the internodes, and this is from a slightly dried specimen, you will see that at the top of each internode, there are long, wispy sort of threads going up the stem. And those long, wispy threads, if you find them, you've found Mackay's horsetail. And you should feel very pleased because, as I say, there are only 20 hectares in Great Britain where it has been found. But it may well be under-recorded and put down as Equus Dutch Rush or Equisetum variegatum. And I think that there's a lot more to be found in Ireland. Next slide, please. Now we come to another, we come to the second of our hybrids, and this is Equisetum litorale, known as shore horsetail, which is an extraordinarily common hybrid, and it is extraordinarily common because both its parents are two of the commonest species that exist in these islands, and it's a hybrid between water horsetail and field horsetail, and I know it growing usually along damp, rocky lake shores, where it can grow in quite large stands, as in the right-hand picture, for which I'm grateful to James Merriweather for allowing me to use it. I'll mention him again later. So a dense stand on the right, it gives a good impression of what it can look like, but the picture on the left also shows that it can just sort of grow more singly. And the picture on the left is a rather immature specimen, but as it matures, the the spike at the end gets longer and longer, and it's one sort of jizz thing is that it differs from the field horsetail parent by having a much longer spike sticking out at the end. But that is not diagnostic. What is diagnostic is shown in the next slide. Here we go. And here in sequence from the top is water horsetail, the hybrid, and field horsetail. And the thing to notice is that in the top two pictures, there's a gap when the stem is broken, and in the bottom picture, there is a join. Now, I only learned this trick or whatever it is very recently, but it really works, and it's amazing that if you take field horsetail and you break it gently and try to pull it apart, the two sides won't come apart. The central part of the stem stays joined. And if whatever you're working with, when you break it, the two bits stay joined, you've got field horsetail. Now, if you think you have field horsetail, but when you break it apart, the two sides actually come apart, you probably have shore horsetail. And in the top, if you break it apart and it just snaps away and the central stem is hugely hollow, you have water horsetail. And we have a picture next which don't move on just yet, we have a picture next which shows the central hollows, which is an interesting feature of these three. But just look again, the field horsetail does not come apart when you break it, and the shore horsetail, the hybrid one, does. So the central stem is the central hollow is another sort of key thing. Next slide. Now, these are a bit dark, but you can get the idea. As you go from left to right, the hollow in the middle gets bigger and bigger relative to the walls of the stem, walls of the species involved. On the left is Equisetum, is field horsetail, where there's a very small hollow. On the right is water horsetail, where there's a huge hollow and a very thin wall. And in the central, you have the hybrid. So look out for litorale. The latest the write-up in the Atlas says that the current distribution reflects more the distribution of people who can recognize shore horsetail than its actual distribution. So if you want a challenge for next summer, go and find Equisetum litorale near you, especially if you have the two parents. And I'll check on your homework next autumn to see how many extra records I've gone in. Right to the DDB. Next, please. Now, Uh, it's amazing how the books about all species just keep getting better and better and better. With the color photography gets better, the presentation gets better, the information gets better, and so on. And here is what I would recommend. I don't know if you can see me as well, but here's my copy of the book. Here is what I would recommend if you want to get involved, not only in horsetails, but in all the other types of ferns that exists. It's by James Merriweather, and quite rightly it won the President's Prize for the best botanical book of the year in, I think it was either last year or the year before, but very recently it was won the President's Prize, and deservedly so. It is an amazing book, and I looked it up on the internet, and you can get it for £20 plus or minus £2 or £3 depending on where you get it. So it's extraordinarily good value, and I would recommend it. It's got all sorts of beautiful, lovely hints as to how you will discern one fern or one horsetail from another. So I would recommend that if you do not have a good fern book. It's excellent. Next. This is the last slide. So thank you for listening, and thank you to the BSBI and DARA, Northern Ireland Environment Agency, for supporting this talk. I hope it has inspired some of you to go out and get involved in horsetails and move on from there to all other species of plants and ferns. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Robert. I thoroughly enjoyed that, and I hope everybody else has as well. So if anybody has any questions, please start dropping them into the Q&A, and I will come to it in a moment. But before I look at any of your questions, I was trying to do some mental maths, Robert, as we're going, and I wondered if you could check my working here. So if we've got 8 species, and I know you mentioned there's the 2 common hybrids, but with 8 species, does that mean there's a possible 28 hybrid pairings between them?
Now, this is an A-level probability question. 8 times 7. Now, it depends whether a hybrid whether reverse hybrids are the same, whereas in
Oh,
rows
yes,
things
of
they're
course.
not.
Yeah.
So 8 times 7, 56 divided by 2 would be 28, I suppose. Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So,
your math was right, if I'm right.
so how many of those exist then, if you know off the top of your
There
head?
are 11. So according to the hybrid book, there are 11. But I was talking to Pat Aycock. Is he the expert on I forgot the right person. Yes, I think so. He thinks that some of these hybrids don't actually exist. They've only been found and described by one person or something. And they're a bit in somebody's imagination. So he thinks there might not be quite 11. Some of them are very hard to discern. I went to a site in County Sligo to find Equisetum dicei, supposedly, and I got a bit, but there's only one person in the world who might or might not be able to decide whether it is or isn't it, and he lives in Germany or somewhere, and he needs fresh material. So it's my Equisetum dicei is still sitting drying out in my dining room. So the hybrids are very hard, and Fred Rumsey, who some of you will know, has sort of argued for weeks over whether something is a hybrid or isn't, and microscopes can and cannot tell it. And so I would avoid most hybrids. They are so rare that you get involved in a minefield.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Robert. So opening up the Q&A then, Leanne asks, how many hectads contain shore horsetail, and in what areas of Great Britain and Ireland? To give us a starting point. I think this is with reference to your homework that you've set.
I would wait, something. I mean, to give you an accurate answer to that, I need to quickly bring up on my other computer a map of them, which would be. I can't tell you offhand. I'm afraid. If people have access to the data, well, everybody could draw a map of it on the BSBI's website.
That is absolutely true. Yes, yeah.
So here, I mean, I mean, here, I mean, I don't know if everybody knows, but James will explain that everybody, whether you're a member of the BSBI or not, has access to maps on the BSBI's database. And you log on to the BSBI, you go to Maps. James will take over from here. You go to Maps.
Yeah, what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and open the link and put it in the chat so everyone can have a
Yeah,
look at it now. But yeah, if you go to this URL, which I will drop in the chat for everybody,
yeah, excellent
um,
idea.
you can type in the species you're interested in.
Put
And
in Equisetum cross litorale or shore horse. Can you put in English names?
that's a good question. I usually just put in the scientific names, and there is the link for Literale. And in fact, if you'd like, I can just quickly share that map with everybody here.
Yeah,
You can have a quick
do.
look. Share this screen here. So if that's worked, no, it hasn't yet. Now I think it's
It's
worked.
coming,
We
it's
should
coming,
have.
it's coming. Zoom in, right. There
There
we
we
are.
go.
And you can see how Fermanagh in Ireland, Fermanagh and Waterford, Fermanagh, Sligo, wait, no, where are we? Yeah, yeah,
Over here, yeah, yeah. As we zoom in, it starts to go in at higher resolution.
yeah. And it gives tetrads and things, which are quite harder to see.
Yeah,
Yeah. So yes, you can see how there are large areas where people, I would presume, aren't looking for it.
yeah, yeah.
We won't name vice counties or anything. But this is where they claim that it's a distribution of recorders who look for it.
Yeah, yeah, that is very interesting because there does seem to be a bit of a westerly bias, but then you've got up here in North Yorkshire, there's quite a lot as well. That's yeah, very interesting. So there we go, Leanne. Hopefully you can spot a gap and
But that link that you have that you've put in, you can get the distribution for all the species that I mentioned, and I did not include distribution maps in my talk because I thought it just sort of uh, one more layer of complication. Any more questions? That's a
right.
really good one.
So we've got Jake Smith asks, what is the best time of year to go outside and ID horsetail species?
Well, during the winter, there's only just the three Dutch Rush, variegated horsetail, and the hybrid between them, Mackay's horsetail. So during the winter, those are the only ones that are visible. But sort of May, June, July, August, September, and the great horsetail, there's still lots of it sort of lying around horizontally on ditches and things at present. So the summer months from May till September.
Great, thank you very much. Carol asks, thanks for that exciting overview. Could I ask a really basic question? Could you explain the idea of internodes? Do they run up the stem or are they found on the branches?
Uh, um, they're on the branches. The sheath is what is on the stem. I may have used them wrongly in my talk, in the wrong place. But a sheath is what is on the stem, and internodes are on the branches.
Because they're kind of broken up into segments, aren't they? So there's kind
Yeah,
of segments of the stem with the sheath in between, and on the branches, they're internodes between those
yeah,
segments. Yeah. I
yeah.
hope that helps, Carol. Um, so we've got a question here. That was great. Is there any use of horsetails? Clearly no use for pollinators, but are they useful for other species? Are any of them indicators of soil conditions?
I, 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 I mean, whew, the main indicator of soil conditions is that the soil is probably unstable below them because they're one of the first things to sort of colonize places. And a lot of these hybrids that have been talked about are often found on disturbed roadside banks where diggers and things have sort of disturbed all the soil. And people sort of feel that hybrids can sort of get an easy take on these bare soils. And so they must be an early colonizer which stabilize places, begin to stabilize things. But I mean, I don't think they're much used to animals or insects or mammals or anything. I can't think of anything that eats them or
The only thing I
anything.
can think of is I know there is one weevil that only lives on horsetails.
Ah, I didn't know
Called
that. So there's one answer to the question. There is
yeah,
a weevil for which it is essential.
Gripus equisetae, I think it's called. Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, and that's found in Britain and Ireland. So
oh, right. It should be interesting to map its distribution.
yeah.
See which species of horsetail it most closely maps to.
Yes, that'd be really, and whether it uses all of them or whether it uses only a
Mm.
subset, yeah, that would be quite interesting to find out. We've got another question here. Um, oh, I think it's actually a comment here. There can only be hybrids between species of each subgenus of, so within subgenus Equisetum or subgenus, and I'm going to mispronounce this, Hippocati, Hippo.
I think that's the one that contains Dutch rush, the evergreen ones.
Yeah, yeah,
So I mean that's yes, that's it comes from somebody who's very technical. Well done them. They're
yes.
absolutely right.
So yeah, you probably wouldn't get the full set of hybrid
No,
pairings.
we'll have to do some more mathematics.
Yeah. Um, Amy says, fantastic talk. Thank you, Robert. Does the James Merriweather book include keys? And if not, could you suggest any useful keys for horsetails?
Um, it um, I've got the book open here. Uh, it uh, it it has uh, it, I mean, it doesn't have keys. It doesn't have keys in the sort of ordinary sense of, dichotomous keys written like in Stace or something, but there's very interesting sort of other types of keys. Here is saying always unbranched, sort of. So that gets you various places. March to April, April onwards. So there's various ways of keying it down, but there are so few of them that you don't really need a key. There's enough in James Merriweather's book to get you there quite quickly without necessarily having a key. But there's enough information in in forms of not the traditional keys to get to where you want to get. But it's a great book.
Excellent. Is there any other book or resource that you would recommend as a to support people with
I mean,
horsetails?
the traditional the Equisetum section of Stace, or if you live in Ireland, Webb, various versions of Webb, or uh, uh, Page has a huge book on horsetails. But if you're just looking at horsetails as opposed to all the ferns, Merriweather, you don't need a big key. Most of them occupy only about half a page to key it out. I'm reaching for my copy of David Webb here. Uh, um, so yeah, I mean, a sort of a page, just a page does the whole key. Uh, so. Uh, I mean, Stace will get you there quite easily, but the Merriweather has pictures as well, which greatly helps you go along.
There we go, Amy. I hope that's useful. Stace, if you want a key, and the Merriweather book, if you want something a bit more visual and supportive.
Yeah.
Um, Mary Dean says that a mnemonic to remember the difference between Equisetum arvense and palustra is Alps. Remember
Out.
Arvensi long, Palustra short, which is the length of the internode. That's a good
Out.
it's a good
Good.
way of remembering
Yes.
that.
I
Yeah.
like those sort of things.
And Danny says there is a good key in Jeremy and Camus.
Camus. Uh,
Camus. Jeremy and Camus.
uh,
I don't know that text, but that might be interesting to look at, Amy. And then we've got a few people just saying thank you very much for an interesting and helpful talk. I've got another question, if you don't mind, Robert.
yep.
Horticultural interest. Are any equisetums planted? Are any equisetums planted for horticultural purposes? Have they ever been used in landscaping or gardening or anything like that?
Yes. Yes. I mean, some of you may have been to the Botanic Gardens in Cambridge, and outside their hot house, or beside their hot house, they have a fern house. And outside the fern house, they have some variety of Dutch rush that is about 6 feet tall and as thick as your finger. And they have it as a garden feature.
And I've seen that in garden centres actually,
Yeah.
and I think sometimes that form can make its way sort of planted around village ponds and so on.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the only time I've seen horsetails deliberately planted. Most people spend all their lives trying to get rid of them.
And I suppose related to that then, are there any alien equisetums? Have there ever been any non-native
Yes, yes,
species?
yes. There's, uh, there, there's, is it Ramoissimum?
Oh,
There's
yes.
there's one that there's a record for somewhere near Bristol, and I think the conclusion is that it somehow got there on ship's ballast or something or other. And there's Equisetum murray, which is a hybrid that occurs along the Wexford Wicklow coast and is a hybrid between Hyamale and this Ramoissimum,
Mm.
which is never known, the second one that I mentioned is never known to have occurred as a native in these islands. So the hybrid has one parent which is unknown in the islands.
That is quite bizarre. That is quite bizarre. I
So
like
I
it's
mean
intriguing.
it's worth reading up. Look up Equisetum cross Murray. And it
Yes.
grows in quite big stands. And I nearly included it in my talk, but didn't. Paul Green sent me some pictures of it because it's on his patch.
Excellent. Leanne asks, says, thank you, Robert. Where are the other species found that aren't found in Britain and Ireland? Are there any places in the world where you won't really find Equisetum at all?
Pass on that one.
Yeah,
I've no idea. Presumably the Antarctic would
I was going to
be
say
the
the same
starting point.
thing.
Eh, I, I don't know how far they continue up into sort of Siberia, northern Russia, and how much cold they can withstand. Uh, though I mean, ones like Equisetum pratense are basically northern species, and I uh, there are certain. I mean, I've seen horsetails in South Africa, for instance. I can't answer that, but outside Britain, there's only 7 species where they
Brilliant.
occur. This is lots of research for people to do for the rest of this evening. Google questions.
Yeah. Um, and Linda asks, could we look at the slide showing the difference between the Arvensi and Palustra pair again? Yes, I will just share my screen.
Yeah,
You'll have to forgive me, I'm not going to show it in the kind of
and
webinar view.
and
Um,
apply Mary Dean's mnemonic or whatever the word is.
yeah, yeah. So Arvensi long, and so you can I think you can see my mouse. You can see that this first internode here is longer than the sheath here. So Arvensi long, And then if I move to palustra,
It's very obvious.
yeah, palustri is shorter than the sheath here. So Alps, Arvensi long, palustri short.
And it has a very different jizz to it. It's much lighter colored, much more delicate, much more. An artist would rather draw it than the other one. It's a certain beauty to it.
Excellent. Angela asks, what makes horsetails so effective at colonizing disturbed ground?
I mean, they produce, I suppose, millions and millions and millions of spores that are really, we're breathing them in all the time, in the hope that they will land on somewhere where there's absolutely no competition. And a lot of the disturbed ground habitats are sort of bottoms of slopes and things, so they're damp and suitable for the spores to develop through the various stages. Uh, um, uh,
And I
so I think
suppose that,
producing all the spores is a good start.
yeah, and I suppose that clonal habit
And
is
naturally disturbed ground is not dug up by diggers in the middle of cities or something. It's on slopes beside streams and banks and cliffs and things.
yeah, yeah. And Josie comments that there is a species that's used a lot in modern garden design as a pond feature, but she can't remember the name right now. Maybe that's that ornamental version of Dutch rush that you mentioned, or maybe there's something else. And if it's something else, I suppose it's something else so that we might have to be aware of to look out for in future.
Yeah. Uh, it might be that Dutch rush, or it
Might
might be
well, yeah.
just some
Robert,
form of water horsetail or something. I don't know. I must look out.
yeah. Robert asks if Literali can hybridize back to either of the parents to get a an even more mingled
I've
hybrid.
no, I've no idea. I'm afraid there are some things I just have to say haven't a clue. Possible, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a lot of hybrids are sterile anyway. I'm not sure about the fertility or sterility of any of these things, but the fact that it makes such huge clonal patches
Yeah.
suggests that it might be sterile. Okay, well, I think that brings us to the end of all the questions. Thank you ever so much, everybody that's asked a question. We've had a thriving Q&A, and thank you ever so much, Robert, for your time this evening and taking us through more than half the world's species of horsetails. It's been absolutely wonderful. And there's some great tips there. And yeah, to those people who've joined us, yeah, do get out and have a look for some horsetails. You know, there's a few that you might see now, but as Robert told us, May, June, September, a good month for it as well. You've got the maps on our website to support you, and you've been given some great advice on books to buy and resources to access in order to help you with that. So with that, I will draw this webinar to a close. I will sort out a recording of this webinar, and I will send everybody an email with a link in case you want to review it and have a look at those pictures of internodes and sheaths and the general kind of overall jizz of the different species. And it will also go up on our YouTube channel so that you can access it in future. So when you're out in May and June and looking at horsetails, you can come back and review it with fresh eyes. We've got, this was our last webinar in this series this year. They start up again after Christmas in January. I will also send the information on that in the email that I send you all afterwards. So thank you ever so much, everybody, for joining us, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your evening. And thank you ever so much, Robert, for your time. Good night, everybody.
Goodbye.